John chapter 5, verses 1 to 18. Jesus heals at Bethesda. Not Bethesda, Maryland in the United States, but a pool area in Jerusalem. The word that we will be featuring is number 5199, health, υγιής. A lot of the terminology in this section is medical, basically. So we'll go through all these words and bring out what they mean for when you study the words in the Bible and see them in other places. Again, we're still continuing with the participles, verbal adjectives in purple, highlighted in purple, and the Apostolic Bible Polyglot we are using right here is the 4th edition of the New Testament. I'm almost done with the book of Leviticus. I'll be, hopefully, God willing, be done tomorrow and get it up maybe Monday on our bookstore, where it will no longer be Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, but Genesis-Leviticus. With that, we'll go into the section here. Jesus heals at Bethesda. Meta tavta in eorti ton Iudeon. Now, what holiday this is, it doesn't say. Jesus was up in Galilee. All of a sudden, chapter 5 here in this section, he goes back down to Jerusalem. Whether or not it was chronological or not is questionable. But the next section, he'll be back up, I believe, in Galilee. So here, though, he is in Jerusalem. And it says, Ke anevi o Iisus is Jerusalema. And Jesus ascended unto Jerusalem. Esti they en tis Ierosolimis epiti provatiki colim vithra, in Jerusalem at the sheep gate pool. Now the pool, colim vithra, was more of a wading pool, swimming type pool. It wasn't called a mikvah where they did ritual baths. They were much smaller. This was a large pool that people came, and we'll find out why. But a picture of this pool is right here. Now, whether or not this was the exact same thing at the time of Jesus, I don't know. I got this off of Wikipedia by looking up the different gates in Jerusalem. So he was at a pool that was real close to this gate, and it says the one being called in Hebrew Bethesda, Bethesda in English. In Hebrew, that's what it's called. It had pente stoas, 5 stoas, ekusa, having. Now the participles here are in purple, and again, the participles, we have it here where you can see where they're declined. The participle also has the tenses and the voice, as you can see down here. Now, stoa, we also have a picture of that, and there's a sort of a stoa, all these columns holding up something above the roof, and people walk in it. So this was some type of a stoa that Jesus was at by the pool. These stoas were around the pool. And it says, in tavtes katekito, plethos poli ton asthenunton, and in this reclined a great multitude being weak. Number 770. Now, Bethesda in the sheep gate, it says in Nehemiah 3:1, and Eliashib the great priest rose up, and his brothers the priests, and constructed the sheep gate. And this was in the Septuagint, the Greek. Some people have denied that this was ever existed, Bethesda and so forth, and questioned the sheep gate. But it is in the Old Testament, in Nehemiah 12:39, it says the fish gate and the sheep gate and the prison gates, they were all mentioned. And the sheep gate was called the sheep gate because it was an entrance for the sacrificial lambs to go into the temple area to be slaughtered. And it's mentioned, these stoas are also mentioned in 1 Kings 6:33, Ezekiel 40:18 and 43:2 of a future temple on Mount Meron, I believe, and the stoas appear there. In Acts 3:11, it says Peter and John healed a lame man at Solomon's Stoa, and Solomon's Stoa is also mentioned as an early gathering place of the apostles in Acts 5:12. So the Stoa's in Jerusalem. It says in 5:3, in tavtes katekito plethos poli ton asthenunton, the present active participle. This one here is also present active. It's happening right at that time. The week, number 770. In Luke 4:40, it says, at the going down of the sun, all as many as had one being weak by various diseases led them to him. And having placed the hands upon each of them, he cured them. So this is our first medical term, weak. In other places, it's called sick. And the next is the typhlon, the blind. We have blind men being healed in Matthew 9:27-28, 2 blind men. And the demon-possessed man that was also blind and mute was healed in Matthew 12:22. And the 2 blind men on the way, Jesus healed, and that was in Matthew 20:30. Next was holon, lame. It says in Matthew 21:14, and came forward to him the lame and blind in the temple, and he cured them. So these people are all coming to this pool to be healed. We'll find out. And then the next one is withered, xiaron. That has to do with dryness. And we see in Isaiah 37:27 where it says, by God, I weakened the hands, and they were dried up. A eunuch was called a dry tree in Isaiah 56:3. Well, he wasn't called by God, but this is what other people had called him. Dried bones are mentioned in Ezekiel 37:11. A dried breast where women no longer nursed the babies in Hosea 9:14. In Matthew 12:10 and Luke 6:6, a man with a withered hand came. It was withered, dried up. I saw that a lot in the hospital. I worked at a mental hospital in Fairview State Hospital in Southern California, Los Angeles, Orange County area. And people had their hands that were just paralyzed, like they couldn't move them. And then it continues, ekthechomenon, and looking out for tin to idatos kinesin, of the movement of the water. Now, this pool must have been very large. You can find out more about this pool if you go to Wikipedia, Bethesda. And so the water, it says, moved, and the people would go down there. And the first one in the water, it says, Angelos gar kata haron katevenen in ti kolim vithra. For an angel at times came down in the pool. So, did this happen? It says it did. So I'm guessing, I'm agreeing that this is what happened. Jesus is there. And it says, Ke etarase to idor, and it disturbed the water. The angel coming down, God's touch on the earth, caused this water to shake, move. And then it says, protos emvas, aorist active, something past, having stepped in, the one first having stepped in, meta tin parachin to idatos, igis, aginato, o dipote, katikato nosimati. The first one having stepped in the disturbance of the water became, and its sound is not a word, I'm changing it to in health. And in whatsoever disease he was held. being sound in health. Sound is not a good translation here, I don't think. I'm changing it in many places. We see it's used for leprosy in Leviticus 13 of somebody being in health. And then in Isaiah 18:21 it says, and Isaiah said to Hezekiah, who was the king, take a dried cluster of figs and grind them and plaster over, and you will be in health. So in health. In Matthew 12:13 it says, Jesus says, and he says to the man, stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and it was restored in health as the other, υγιής. In Mark 5:34, and he said to her, O daughter, the belief of yours has delivered you. Go in peace and be in health from your scourge of the flow of blood. And then it's used in other ways, healthy words in Titus 2:8. So the idea of health is what it's referring to. So they became in health in whatsoever disease, nosemity. I'm changing that one also. I didn't scratch it through, but that's going to be malady. Whatever malady, because it can be more than just a disease. A disease today, like tuberculosis or chickenpox and things like that, but there's way more than a disease. Malady is a broader term than a disease, so I'm changing that to malady. I don't know why I didn't put it on there, but I should have. And then it continues in 5:5, in they tis anthropos aki triakonta ke octo eti ekon in ti asthenia. And there was a certain man there 38 years being held in his feebleness. Now, whether he was 38 years old or whether something happened to him later, he could be older than 38, but he was held, and that's present active, being held in his feebleness. That's number 769. Also, this word is used as weakness and sickness, and it's asthenia is the Greek word. Matthew 8:17, it says, he himself took our weaknesses and bore our diseases. In Luke 13:11, it says, and behold, there was a woman having a spirit of feebleness, 8 and 10 years, and was stooped down and not able to raise her head totally. And seeing her, Jesus called out and said to her, O woman, you have been loosened of your feebleness. And she was able to stand up straight. Paul in Romans 8:26 says, and likewise also the Spirit aids in our weaknesses. It doesn't have to be a disease, but our weaknesses, whatever the weakness we have in the Spirit, I believe, is what he's talking about here, are both spirit and body. Other people that had weaknesses, asthenia was Lazarus, who was raised from the dead. Publius, who was a man who was a Roman official on the island of Malta, whose father was sick that Paul healed. Paul mentions the weaknesses that he had, and Timothy weaknesses, and Paul tells him to drink wine for his stomach's sake, for his many weaknesses or sicknesses. In verse 6, tuto idon o Isus katekimenon. And this one, Jesus, having seen this one, reclining. So Jesus goes in there, he's in that stoa, looking at all these people. He sees a man that's laying down. Aorist active, having seen, because it happened right before. And K, gnos, knowing, having known, another aorist active participle. Oti polin, idi chronon eki, and having known that already a long time he was held. Legi avto says to him, Theles igis geneste, do you want to be in health? So here I added the in health, which is supposed to be. Do you want to be in health? I had sound before. In verse 7, apokrithi avto o asthenon, and the one being invalid. Now there's our next medical term, invalid, 770. That's close to the asthenia, but this is asthenos. The asthenia is a condition, asthenos is a noun. He's invalid. It's also translated as weak, because we'll see it's not always has to do with sickness, but it's also translated as sick. In Luke 9:2 it says, and he sent them to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal the ones being weak or invalid, asthenos. The disciples of Jesus sent forward. Luke 11:1, it says, and there was a certain sick man. So now it uses a sick man. That was Lazarus from Bethany. Dorcas was a woman that died, that Peter came and raised from the dead in Acts 19:12, and she was invalid, sick for a while. But then in 2 Corinthians 12:10, Paul says, therefore I think well in weaknesses. So the weakness isn't always a disease or sickness. You can have a weakness in other ways. Romans 9:19, Paul says, and not being weak in belief. See, now sickness wouldn't fit here, not being sick in belief, but not being weak in belief, he contemplated not his own body deadened. That was Abraham. 1 Corinthians 8:11, Paul says, and the brother being weak shall perish over your knowledge, for whom Christ died. So there are weak brethren, and we shouldn't do things to cause them to collapse or fail. Weak brethren. So we have weak, sick, and so forth, invalid. And then it continues in 7, O Kyrie, anthropon uk echo, ina oten parakthi to idor, vali me istin kolim vithron. O Lord, I have not a man that whenever the water should be disturbed, should lay me in the pool. He was crippled. He couldn't walk, couldn't crawl fast enough, apparently. He says he doesn't have anybody because Jesus is asking him if he wants to be healed. Well, now this man naturally is thinking about the only healing it could be would be to go to the water. Why would he be asking me that? Of course, I'm here, to be healed. So why would you ask me if I want to be healed when I'm here? It's obvious I'm here. It's a stupid question he might be saying to himself. And then it says, "En-o they erkome ego," in which time I come, ego alos proemu kataveni, another before me descends. So I'm crawling down there, but somebody else is blind, can just run down there and jump in the pool, and he's healed. And I'm not. And don't have anybody. In verse 8, legi avto o Isus, Jesus says to him, egire, aron ton kravaton su ke paripati, arise, lift your litter, and walk. Now he's laying there. He could think, well, this guy's nuts. What he's telling me to do that, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to lay here and wait, get out, leave me alone. No, he didn't. He didn't. What happened? Ke evtheos ageneto igis o anthropos. Immediately the man became in health. And so he probably felt it himself. All of a sudden something feels different. I can move my legs. And he ire ton kravaton avtu, and he lifted his litter as Jesus told him to do. Ke peripati, and he walked. So, picking up the litter and leaving out, probably happy as could be. Unbelievable that he is there. Now, why he was paralyzed in this way could have been something he did that's bad. I knew a man, I met him, that was in a wheelchair and loved the Lord. But an earlier reason he was in the wheelchair is he was with a bunch of, I don't know what you want to call them, gangbangers, people that were doing something bad. Police were called, and the police had to leave real fast, and his coat or something caught on to the police car, and he was dragged 50 feet or so, and he became paralyzed. So he was sinning, and he became paralyzed. Now, I'm not saying everybody that's paralyzed or injured is sinning, but in this case, the man was. And now, here, going back to the story, is a very good possibility that's what happened to this man. Why? Well, we'll find out here. Elegon un im iudei to tetherapevmeno. Then the Jews said to the one having been cured. Now, here's our next health word. Being cured. Number 23, and this is a participle, perfect passive, having been, but he still is cured now, but he was cured then a few minutes ago. Now he's still cured. It's also used, we also use the word to attend to, or the word that it comes from, therapeutics, therapevmeno, and we have the word therapeutics. Esther 2:19 says, but Mordecai, her uncle, attended to affairs in the courtyard. It wasn't medical here. He attended to the affairs in the courtyard of the royalty in Iran, Persia rather. Psalms 19:6 says, many attend to the persons of a king. So attending. But then in Matthew 8:7 it says, and Jesus says to him, I coming shall cure him. In Matthew 8:16 it says, and he cast out the spirits by a word, and all having illness he cured. So now we see that the people that are ill, he's cured. And in Matthew 10:1, he gave to them authority of unclean spirits so as to cast them out, and to cure every disease and every infirmity. And this was to the disciples going out. And so they cured every disease, to cure. And they saw him with this, carrying this cot or mattress, whatever it was, and they said, Sabbaton esti, it's a Sabbath. Uk ekasti si areton kravaton. It's not allowed for you to carry a litter. Can't do that. Apokrithi avtis, and he responded to them, saying, O Pisas me igi, the one having made me in health. Aorist, active, past tense, because he had made him in health. Akinos me, Ipan, he told me, Haron, ton kravaton su ke peripati, carry your litter and walk. So this is what Jesus told him. He's telling him, that's what the man told me. I mean, if somebody heals you, tells you to do something, and you've been blind all your life, and they healed you, whatever they said, you're going to do. This is what this man did, but we find out what happens here, and it says in verse 12, Erotis son un avton, and they ask him, Tis estin, o anthropos, o epon, si, who is the man having said to you, Aaron ton kravaton su ke peripati? Who told you to do that? Oh, but the one, eathis, uk idi tis estin, having been healed. It's aorist, he had been, but the ben means it happened to him. He wasn't the one doing it, passive. He knew not who it is. Ogar Isus exenevson, for Jesus turned aside. So apparently after the man is walking, Jesus turns and leaves. oklu ontus in totopo, of a multitude being in the place. And that's present active. They were there. And so he disappears into the crowd. Many people there, a multitude. In verse 14, Meta tafta evriski avton o Isus into iero. And after these things, Jesus finds him in the temple. So now he's went from the pool, went across the city to go to the temple, and he goes in there. And who does he find? Jesus is there. He finds and he runs across him in the temple. Okay. Ipan avto, Jesus said to him, he said to him, Ive, see, igiis gegonas, see, having become in health, miketi amartane, no longer sin. So there leads me to believe that he was sinning when he was paralyzed, because he says no longer sin. So he was sinning in a me, hieron ti si genite, that nothing worse should happen to you. So these miracle services that I was mentioning in the last section, people that have been cured, is not the end. It's just part of the system of being on earth, having different things happen to you. Some people can go through without very many illnesses or sicknesses, and others are afflicted from birth or early on. But what matters, Jesus says sin. That's what's worse, if you start sinning and doing things that are against God. That's a worse malady than being paralyzed or being born blind or anything that's bad like that. You may be listening to this and have something you're saying, well, yeah, you're saying that, but you're not blind and you're not lame or going through a terrible health problem, and I'm not. But still, I'm saying what God is saying, what Jesus says, not what I'm saying to you, that nothing worse should happen to you by sinning. So if you are in bad shape, you could be in worse shape, and that would be through sin and not believing in Jesus Christ and going to Hades. Or if you're listening to this and you are in bad shape, you can see that worse things can even happen. So you want to believe in Jesus Christ and walk with Him and do the things He says the best you can, even in bad shape. So what happened? Verse 15, Apilthan o anthropos, the man went forth, ke aningele tis iutheis, and he announced to the Jews. So he goes back to the ones questioning him, O te sus estin o pisas avton igii, that Jesus is the one having made him in health. So he apparently didn't know who Jesus was, but now he knows. Now, whether he's going back there to cause problems for Jesus, we don't know. In verse 16, ke dia tuto ediokon ton isun iuthei. On account of this, the Jews persecuted Jesus, ke ezitun avton apokatine, and sought to kill him. Otitavta epi in savato, for these things he did on the Sabbath. So this man didn't have to go back to these people. He didn't have to do that, but by his going back caused problems with Jesus. Other places, Jesus tells people not to say anything, but yet they go out and tell everybody, and Jesus is hindered from doing things that God, his Father, wants him to do because of man's disobedience to the things of Christ. And then in verse 17, a verse o thei sus apakrinato avtis, but Jesus responded to them. So somehow he's responding, whether in person or hearing about it. O patir mu eos arti ergazate kago ergazome. My Father until now works and I work. He's saying, I'm doing the works of God. God is leading and I'm following, doing what He says. Now, whether he's told the people there or they heard it, then it says, Dia tuton un malon ezitun avton iude apokatine. On account of this, then, the Jews sought to kill him more. They hated him before, now they're hating him even more. Why? Oti monon eleve to salvaton. Not only he untied the Sabbath, ala ke patera idion elegan ton theon, but also he called God his own Father. Ison iavton pion to theo, making himself equal to God. Jesus calls himself the Son of God. He's quoted by saying that by the Pharisees in the Bible, and many other places alludes to his divinity. I don't think he never said, I am God, but the Son of God and so forth. So to me it's very interesting that it says right here that the Jews saw that he's making himself equal to God, which he was. He's not making himself, that's what he is. That is who Jesus is. God taking human form, which he did in the Old Testament. But these people, they don't believe, because they don't want to believe that Jesus is who he says he is. But yet they have rejected God in many places in the past when God has come to visit them. And today, the rejection of Jesus Christ still goes on, and results are chaos throughout the world. Now, with Israel back in as a nation, and the Muslims against the Jews are at each other's throat. They sort of deserve each other. But the Christians, the believers, are the ones that suffer a lot of times because of these two groups of people fighting and trying to harm each other. So this belief of the Jews at the time of Jesus, it still exists just as much today, unfortunately, in Israel. Next section, the Father and the Son.